Dust hung thick in the late summer air over the small frontier town of Dry Hollow. It clung to boots, settled in lashes, and softened the edges of every building that stood under the relentless sun. Out beyond the town's edge, nestled behind a rusted gate and a field of grazing cattle, stood a lonely homestead, a place spoken of in hushed tones and nervous glances. Everyone knew about Boone Calder. 6'6" and built like the barn he'd built with his own hands, Boone had once been the pride of Dry Hollow. Until the war came. Until the fire. Until the woman he'd planned to marry never returned from her trip east. Since then, Boone had shut himself away. For 17 long years, he'd tended his cattle, his land, and little else. Children were told not to wander near the Calder Ranch. Women who once sighed over his broad shoulders now crossed the street when they saw him ride into town. Boone was a ghost who hadn't died, just a man too broken to bury. That was until 3 girls showed up at his gate. It was a Sunday afternoon when they came, 3 young women in simple prairie dresses, sunburnt and barefoot. Boone had been checking the fence line when he saw them walking up the path, the eldest carrying a baby goat, the youngest limping on a bad foot, and the one in the middle, she walked like she'd carried the world too long. "Name's Isla," the middle one said, squinting up at him. "That's my sister Lottie, and the littlest is Emmy. We're looking for work, Mr. Calder. Heard you got cows needing milking and no hands to help." Boone stared, silent, the words foreign after so long and used. Lottie added, "We ain't afraid of dirt. Or hard work." Boone looked at the broken sandals on their feet, the calluses on their hands. Then he saw the baby goat chewing on Emmy's braid. He cleared his throat. "Milk barn's out back." They moved into the bunkhouse that night, after Boone fixed the lock and dusted out the cobwebs. He said little, only pointed to tools and routines. Yet over the weeks that followed, the silence between them began to soften. Isla worked hardest, milking cows before dawn, cleaning tack, cooking simple meals. She didn't ask Boone questions, and maybe that's why he started answering the ones she never voiced. He learned they were orphans. Their father had died in the mines, their mother of sickness. They'd walked for miles after a dishonest uncle tried to sell Isla to a traveling merchant. Boone's fists clenched when she told him that. He taught Lottie how to wrangle calves and Emmy how to feed the chickens. Isla never once asked for favors, but Boone found himself fixing their boots, leaving extra meat on their plates, and riding into town for thread and soap. 17 years without touching a woman. Boone had forgotten how soft laughter could sound, how a home could feel full just from someone hanging linens on a line. One night, after mending a busted latch, he found Isla sitting by the porch, sewing Emmy's torn dress. "Storm's coming," he said. Isla nodded. "You always sit out here before the rain?" "I used to." She looked at him. "Why'd you stop?" He hesitated, then quietly said, "It reminded me of her." Isla didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to. Instead, she said, "I sit out 'cause I like the way it smells. Like things might start over." Boone looked at her hands, the way they moved through thread and cloth. Steady. Scarred. "Maybe they can," he whispered. The storm broke hard that night. Wind ripped shingles off the tool shed, and lightning cracked a tree near the cattle pen. Boone was already at the barn when he saw Emmy standing in the open, crying, goat in her arms. "Emmy!" Isla shouted, running after her as Boone thundered past, scooping the girl up in one arm and the goat in the other. By the time Isla reached them, Boone was soaked and furious, but not at Emmy. "You don't ever run into a storm like that again," he roared. "I could have lost you." The words silenced them all. Boone's chest heaved, and Isla stared up at him, eyes wide not with fear, but something else. Understanding. She stepped forward, placing a hand gently on his soaked shoulder. "We're not running any more," she said. "Not from storms. not from men. He looked at her, and something long locked inside him cracked. By spring, Boone Calder was no longer a ghost. He rode into town more often, with Isla seated beside him. They sold milk and cheese from their growing herd. The townsfolk, once wary, now nodded respectfully. Children waved when he passed. It wasn't sudden. Boone and Isla didn't rush. But little by little, her presence grew like ivy over old brick, softening, steadying, healing. One late summer evening, Boone sat on the porch as the sun melted into gold over the field. Isla joined him, handing him a mug of coffee. "You ever think about rebuilding the side corral?" she asked, not looking at him. He sipped, thinking on it. She hesitated. "You ever think about starting over, with someone?" He set the mug down and turned to her. "I think about it every day since the storm," he said. "But I didn't want to scare you off." Isla smiled, tired and hopeful. "Boone Calder, I've faced men scarier than you and buried pain deeper than most. You don't scare me." He stood, towering over her, but his voice was soft. "Then stay." "I've been staying," she whispered. "Now I want to belong." He kissed her then, slow, reverent. Like a man who hadn't touched a woman in 17 years, and wanted this moment to last 17 more. The town of Dry Hollow came alive the day Boone Calder married Isla Maynard. Lottie wore blue and cried into her apron. Emmy danced with the goat around the altar. The townsfolk brought pies, and even the pastor smiled more than usual. Boone built a new barn and carved Isla's name above the door. They planted a garden behind the house and took in orphaned calves and stray chickens like kin. And at night, when the sky turned violet and the fields quieted, Boone would sit beside Isla and say, "I still can't believe I get to touch you." And she'd reply, "You earned every inch."